Today's date is October 3rd, 2023. My name is Chad Gibbs. I have the pleasure of interviewing Jack Cynamon for the USC Shoah Foundation. This is a remote interview. Mr. Cynamon is in London in the United Kingdom, and I am in Charleston, South Carolina in the United States. Mr. Cynamon, could you introduce yourself and say your full name and spell your first and last name, please?
My name is Jack Cynamon, J-A-C-K, second name C-Y-N-A-M-O-N, Cynamon.
Okay. What was your name at birth?
My name at birth was Jacques Cynamon, J-A-C-Q-U-E-S, Jacques Cynamon.
And when were you born?
31st of May, 1934.
How old does that make you today?
89.
And where were you born?
I was born in Brussels, in Belgium.
And can you tell us about your family, your mother and father, and did you have any siblings?
No brothers or sisters. My mother was English born. Met my father, who was Polish born, met in Brussels. Got married, obviously. It's a lovely story in itself, but how that came about. But basically, lived in Brussels up till, well, during the war, etc., etc., etc. We had a wonderful childhood. I remember having the odd holidays by the beach, seaside resorts in Belgium, which is Blankenberg, and Knock, which was lovely. And I remember my father working during the week and meeting us at weekends at the beach, which was really lovely. Very happy early childhood. My earliest recollection basically is at about 6 years old, waking up one morning and seeing the skies are full of planes, German planes coming over. That's my very earliest recollection of that particular time.
Were you and your mother and father a religious home before the war?
To be truthful with you, I don't remember. I really don't remember that part of the story. No, not at all. No.
Okay. And do you, I'm sorry if you've already said, but where was your father from?
My father was from Poland, Biała Polacka, as far as I know. Yeah.
And what did your parents or your father do for a living?
My father had where we lived, in the basement, he had a small leather factory producing handbags, etc., etc.
What do you remember about the invasion or the beginning of the war?
Strange recollections. I remember my parents being very frightened of the oncoming Germans' approach. And I have faint recollections of going to the station and everybody going on to what seemed to be like a cattle track and straw covered, and the train going on and on for approximately 5 days and nights. And occasionally the train would stop and people would pass us by some food or water, and we would finish up in the Pyrenees, where we stayed, I believe, for a while, probably a year or so. My father became a farmer, worked on the farms, and I remember them returning to Brussels when they heard that things had improved, and that is around 41.
And what happens after that? You've returned from France, and your whole family is in Belgium together still?
Yeah, everything seemed okay, I think, in the early 40s, 41. But I think things started taking the turn around 1942. There was obviously the Germans were after finding Jews, and my father tried to escape initially to Switzerland. I remember going on a train, and I remember, of course, my mother would tell me the same story. She would tell me part of the stories when I asked her. that we were left at the border, the Swiss border, by the guard. He'd taken all our money and left us, and we had to return to Brussels. After some time, I think we tried again, and this time for the Spanish border, but the similar thing happened again, and each time, again, the guy took the money, left us stranded, and we had to return to Brussels.
Mm.
It was then that my father decided to go into hiding.
And how did that work?
Well,
did you hide together, or?
No, they found an apartment. They couldn't live in the house, obviously. They found an apartment and in an attic, really. And they were helped by the employer, a man named John Knud, Cnudde. He gave them food and provided them with food whilst they were being hidden. And it was during that time that I was 8 years old, hidden in an attic with my parents, and they decided that it was time for me to leave because I was making too much noise. Obviously, I was too. I wanted to.
As a young child, it was hard for them to keep you quiet in that, hiding in the attic?
Exactly. And obviously, being a boy, I wanted to run around and do all the things. And so they decided to find an organization or somebody that could take me away and hide me. In one respect, I was very lucky. I had blonde hair, blue eyes, and certainly didn't look Jewish. And there's an organization in Belgium which is a committee for the defense of Jews, and they placed me with a priest, Father Bishop Andre. And I remember the day that my parents took me to meet Bishop Andre and gave me away. And that was the very last time I saw my father. And I was obviously stayed at the orphanage for 2.5 years, became a choir boy, did all the things that choir boys do, singing and doing hymns and whatever. And basically, from my point of view, didn't know anything else because being a boy, I was very happy. I was with other boys. And I suppose I can honestly say, I don't think I missed my parents at that particular time because it was, it's a boarding school. That's what happens. You're too young probably to remember exactly how I felt at that stage. Yeah.
Did you hide in one place the whole time?
Yes. We were moved on one occasion, but then this is the strange thing that happened. Then we had the Battle of the Bulge in 1944, and we had to move away because we were in the Ardennes at that time. The orphanage was in the Ardennes, and we had to move to Brussels pretty quickly. The priest came with us, and we finished up in the Ardennes. Exactly where or how, I don't know. But then, out of the blue, my mother found me. I have to tell you, I didn't want to go with her. I wanted to stay with my friends. I didn't know my mother. I'd forgotten about her. Obviously, it's been 2.5 years or so since I last saw her. And I wanted to stay with my friends. But anyway, my mother took me back, and she, being English and a citizen of a country at war, did not go to a concentration camp. She finished up in a place called La Bourboule, which is in a massive centrale, and took me back there. And we stayed there quite comfortably, living on Red Cross parcels with Americans as well. And we lived there for quite some time until the time came for us to leave. And she managed to get some form of transport. How she managed, I don't know, she was an incredible woman. She managed to do so many wonderful things, so many incredible things. She managed to get us back to London, where my grandparents lived. They managed to escape Brussels at the start of the war. They managed to escape Brussels and finished up in London. And we finished up in London as well, and initially living with them in like a 2-bedroom apartment. From what I recall, I went to school, didn't know a word of English. I went to a secondary school in London, did not know a word of English. And basically, my name changed from Jacques to Jack, because remembering that it was just at the end of the war, and English boys did not know Jacques. They know Jack. So they called me Jack, and that name has stood to this very day. So from Jacques, I became Jack. And I had 4 years of school. That was it. Didn't know a word of English, but somehow or other, I did very, very well at school. Couldn't understand why I did so well, particularly in maths. And I can only assume that the priests must have taught me maths, because I was pretty good at it from straight away. And obviously my French stood me in good stead. And I remember having to go in front of the class and having to pronounce the R's, because they can't say rouge, for example, which is rouge or rien de rien. And so that was my school days.
Let's go back a little bit, since you brought up the priests. Can you tell us more about what hiding was like? And did you know that you needed to pretend to be Catholic or to be one of the...
Not really.
Like the rest?
Not really. No. I didn't really know. I mean, I probably was too young. Remember, I was 8 by that time, 8.5. I didn't know, I think at that age, you're not fully aware of what is going on around you, I didn't know anything at all. I just accepted what it was. It's only at a much later stage that I appreciated exactly what was happening to me, or what had happened to me at that stage.
Yeah. And was there any talk of conversion or baptism at the time?
Yes, all the time. I became a choir boy, with all the bills and the things and everything else, and I knew all the songs and whatever. As I said, I didn't want to go back with my mother. I wanted to remain with the church. Mm-hmm. And somehow or other we escaped that. So we got back to France, to my chagrin. I was very upset.
Well, before we go back to, as you got all the way to the beginning of your life in England, before we go back to that, why don't we talk about how you learned about your wartime life and your family's history before we move on? Would you like to start there?
Basically, it was only much later that I found out about myself. I had a very good friend during my teenage, and he was a friend, he was a Polish friend. We became quite close, and he was from the Kindertransport. And I happened to meet him many, many years later in Florida. And he mentioned to me that I was a Holocaust survivor. I said, no, I can't be a Holocaust survivor. I haven't been in the camps. I don't know anything about that. He said, absolutely, you are a Holocaust survivor. And I want you to come with me to Amsterdam, where there is a convention for the hidden children of the Holocaust. And I was surprised. I didn't want to go. And I discussed it with my wife. And we decided to go to Amsterdam to find out what this is all about. Because for, I suppose, 30 odd years, I never spoke about it. Never spoke about it to anybody. But now my curiosity was aroused, and so we went to Amsterdam. And I was amazed to find that there was so many people who were all hidden children from various parts of Europe. Really, absolutely amazed. And I didn't know anything about myself. Who was I? What happened to me? Whatever. And very fortunately, there were various booths representing countries, different countries in Europe, which could help hidden children. And I went to the Belgium booth, and they asked me a certain question, and the only thing I knew was that I had an album of the Belgian royal family, which I've kept at home. It's the only memorabilia I've got. And on the front was written, on the occasion of winning to Jacques Knud. Now, Jacques Knud was my false name. And that was the name of the guy who used to help my parents, the employer. I took his name. So Knud became my false name during the war. So it had to Jacques Knud on the occasion of winning your first gold star. And it was 1944. It's signed 1944. So I told them about that. And they said, well, we will look into it. So they knew Jacques Knud. And next thing I knew, I received a fax explaining that I was hidden by Joseph André, Bishop Joseph André, and where I was, which was in near Namur. And I had a hidden code name I didn't know anything about. And basically, that's all they could tell me about. And I left there. I was absolutely distraught. I thought, this is very strange. I needed to find out more about it. So they gave me the phone number in Brussels of the Hidden Children Convention. Hidden Children. There's an office there which I could talk to, and they would give me more information. So I took the phone number and back to London and decided to phone the company. They told me about myself, quite a few things. They knew exactly the same thing, my number, who I was hidden with, etc., Father Bishop André. So they said, by the way, if you like, Father André has died, but his assistant is still alive. Wow. I can tell you. I decided to phone him. His name was Auguste. Forget his name for a moment. And I picked up the phone and he said, Monsieur Auguste. And I said, Jacques Knud. Oh, he went, little Jackie. He obviously remembered me. And I spoke some French with him. He does speak some English, and we had a chat. And I decided to visit him in Brussels as soon as I possibly could, which I did. A couple of months later, Norma and I went to Brussels to see Monsieur Auguste, and he greeted me, and we had quite a bit of a chat. And he explained to me that basically he helped Bishop André hide the information regarding each child. There was 5 different books. The first book maybe with date of birth, the second, the name of the parent, the second name, the name of birth, and so on and so on. And the 5 books, you had to have the 5 books to connect with each other. And he kept those for security in case later in life people needed to know some history about the children, where they were, etc., etc. And with that, I left. And that was the end of it. Then, I'm trying to think for a moment where I went to thereafter. I'm going to stop for a minute. Let me get my recollection. I'm trying to think for a moment, if you don't mind. Yeah, Enfant Caché. We actually went to Belgium and met Enfant Caché. We actually went to their offices, and they took me the next day to a memorial for the Jews. There was 23,000 Jews who died in Belgium, and in the memorial there was it was a black marble in alphabetical order. Very moving, extremely moving. And for the first time, I saw my father's name in print with 11 other Cynamons. All my uncles and aunts had perished in the Holocaust. very, very moving time.
Jack, is that the first time that you knew the fate of your father?
Yes. Well, my mother told me, obviously, she knew what had happened. She knew, in actual fact, she relates the story that the last time she saw him, he made a promise, make sure that Jack has a bar mitzvah. And she had to promise that. And she fulfilled that promise when I was in England 11 years later, and I was bar mitzvah in England. You know, excuse me a minute. But you know, it has left me, as time went on, we went from different Holocaust conventions. We went to Detroit, Washington rather. We did do the one in Washington. And that was very moving, very, very moving. We arrived and we went to the Holocaust Museum. And going through the Holocaust Museum, very moving. And leaving at about 4 o'clock, I saw a small photograph of Father Andre surrounded by children. And I thought maybe it could be me. So I decided to come back the next day. And I went to the front desk, obviously. And I said, you have a photograph there of Father Andre, the man who saved my life. Is it possible I could see the photograph? And they took me upstairs and they had all the information they could possibly have. And I've got some of the photographs they showed me. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of the children there. But they gave me a lot of information. I have information showing, for example, that they gave me a document showing the actual convoy that my father was sent to Auschwitz, convoy 23. And various other documents showing all they have everything, showing all the Cynamons that have died at the same time. But the very most moving one was when we went to Jerusalem. Again, it was a Hidden Children Convention. And you do hear some terrible stories. I mean, one particular story really, really hurt me, really. It was a Canadian man we met. And he wanted to tell his story, but he wanted to cry. And he was telling the story that he was hidden by a Gentile family. Must have been 7 or 8 years old, the same as myself at the time. And the way that they used to hide him was that they had a living room and they would remove a coffee table and then a rug that it was sitting on, and then remove the planks from the floorboards. They would put a towel in each of the children, him and his sister. They put a towel in their mouth, put them on the floor, in the joists, cover the planks, cover the rug, cover the coffee table. And basically he was buried alive until such times as it was safe for him to come out. And he said this happened to him several times and has left him a bad imprint for the rest of his life. And he can't get it out of his mind. So that's what happened to him. But the thing that was the most dramatic to me was what happened in Jerusalem. I was in a workshop, and one of the workshops I went to was called Hidden Children. they didn't want to know anything about your past. Didn't know how you were hidden or anything like that, because there was a psychologist. And the psychologist held an egg. And he said the only person holding the egg is allowed to speak. Only one person at a time. And I'll pass the egg around as we go along. So, excuse me a minute. The first person to speak said, I miss playing with children. I never had the chance to play with children when I was hidden. And now that I'm grown up, I don't know how to manage my grandchildren. But most of all, I hated my mother. And he went to the second person. A very similar story. And they said, I hated my mother. And the same again. And everyone in that room, more or less, hated their mother or their parents for having given them away. And it's no secret to my friends and to my family that I had no love for my mother. None. I looked after her, bought her an apartment, do everything a dutiful son could do for my mother. But there was no love. And now I realize why. Ouch. Excuse me. Wish she was alive. And I could hug her and say thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. My biggest
Jack,
regret in life.
You wanted to express in your interview that how the Holocaust weighed on your relationship with your mom was your biggest regret.
Yeah. It's the one thing that my biggest regret in life. I could just hug her. And, you know, it's just... She went through so much to help me, to find me, with no appreciation. And it must have been very difficult for her to see that somehow or other she wanted to hug me and I would somehow or other push her away. And it must have been the most terrible, terrible thing. And I still live to this day. With that regret, really, really regret.
And all those feelings are from, would you call it, misplaced abandonment of being hidden with...
Look, let me put it to you this way. Obviously, I'm not the only one, because it was then that I realized that so many children felt the same way. You left me, but she hid me out of love, and that's, and so many children went through the same situation, I'm sure.
Does memory of your father enter into those?
No. I have no memories of my father whatsoever. I would love to hear his voice, to hear what he sounds like. I have no idea, because my parents spoke Yiddish all the time, because my mother coming from England, my father from Poland, and the mutual language was Polish, you know. I did not Polish, my mutual language was Yiddish. And obviously I learned some Yiddish during that time, but that was their mutual language, but I've never had the occasion. I'd love to hear my father's voice, for example. The only thing I remember about my father is the fact that holding his hand, he had no thumb. And the story goes that the Russians chopped his thumb off because he wouldn't go into the Russian army. That's the story. But that's as much as I know about him. I know very, very little about him. Very little. But basically, the man the story should be about Joseph Andre, which is a man who saved, I believe, well over 1,000 children. Well over 1,000 children. He placed them, from what I've found out, based in various institutions, and they even hid children in hospitals, apparently, making out that they were ill. And obviously, we relied entirely, and this is what I found, entirely on the church. It was the nuns, the priests, etc., who helped hide all these children, because apparently the Germans did not encroach upon the church at all. So it is upon them that I have to thank them, etc., for helping me and helping all the others.
Why don't we take a break there, Ollie, if you're hearing that, and we can come back and do liberation and life after the war.
Okay.
Okay, so we're returning from a break and our interview with Jack Cynamon. Jack, I wonder if you could tell us about your memories of the moment of liberation.
Well, it's very strange. We lived in the country in the Ardennes, the orphanage, and I have small recollections of the priest trying to find out how the war was going on. And then I distinctly remember, and I don't have many memories, there's only certain points that one can remember. And I remember in the morning, you could hear at the end of the road carriages. So we all ran and we saw that the Germans were pulling out with horse-drawn carriages. Their guns were being actually pulled along by horse-drawn carriages. And so obviously we were relieved, so hopefully that would be the end of the Germans. And then in the afternoon, we heard the rumbling, and believe it or not, there was about 5 or 6 tanks. Right at the front was a Jeep, and the tanks were Americans, and we all ran up. I remember all running forward, and it was the first time that I had bubblegum and sweets which were thrown at us. And that was a very joyous moment, very, very joyous. That was the first time we were liberated, thank God. And although, mind you, we didn't see very much of the Germans, I have the odd recollection of them coming into the classroom looking for the teacher, because obviously they were looking for maybe men to do some work or whatever, but that's very few recollection of seeing Germans at the orphanage at all, being left alone by the priest and such likes. And as I said, I didn't look Jewish at all, with my blonde hair and blue eyes. Thanks for that. Yeah.
So you're liberated by the Americans, and then your mother comes to get you?
No, basically what happened, if you remember, I did mention that we had the Battle of the Bulge. Oh, I do have one recollection, actually, strangely enough. We were playing out, and we saw these planes coming along and dropping parachutes into the forest for the, obviously, resistance. And next thing we knew, the planes came right over us and started shooting. We thought they were shooting at us. And we saw what we thought were bullets, but in actual fact, they were shells that had dropped from the planes, and they were actually firing at the station, not at us. And that's one of the recollection I had playing with the guys or with the boys in the fields. Then after that, I remember we all packed up. The Germans were coming back, and we had to go to Brussels because of the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans were on the way back. And I don't know what happened then, but out of the blue, my mother just turned up. And she said, "You're coming back with me." And I said, "No, I don't want to come back with you. I want to stay with my friends. I want to stay with the priest. This is the life I've known. This was the life I've known for the last 2.5 years." And I didn't want to go back. But anyway, I did go back. And we went back to La Bourboule, which was very pleasant, actually. It was a hotel. She was very fortunate because she was interned with Americans, British and Americans, and we lived on Red Cross parcels for quite a while. And it was quite pleasant. And then I suppose the time came for everybody to leave at some point, and we left. And I remember we actually arrived in New Haven at the Port of London on August the 2nd, 1945. And we went straight, I don't know how we got there, but we went and stayed with my grandparents for quite a while until we could find our own accommodation. They had to find me a school. I probably went to the worst school in England, I would think. It really was. They were really very, very poor. As I said, when it came to exam times, I came first in maths. I think I even came first in English and French, and came first in the class. So obviously I must have had some tuition from the priest, which I was not aware of. Yeah. All I had was 4 years of school, and I left when I was 15. Went into leather goods, decided to go into leather goods, same as my father. And at the age of 18, had to make a choice between joining the British or the Belgian army, because obviously the time when everybody had to go in the army, I had 2 years in the army. I was very, very, very lucky, very lucky. I did my training, and then came the time for me to go into a certain regiment and whatever. And most of my party, the people, the whole of my regiment, they all went to Korea, except me. I went to a place called Chester because they needed an equipment repairer. I didn't even know what an equipment repairer was, but apparently an equipment repairer was a person who repaired all the canvases that went over the trucks. And the army being what it is, they didn't need an equipment repairer, so they put me in the stores for 2 years. Anyway, I didn't go to Korea, so that was a great thing. But they put me in equipment repairer because I was in leather goods before. That's why they put me in equipment repairer. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I talked over you. What years were you in the army?
52 to 54. Yeah, and I met my wife when I was in the army.
Yeah.
Went to a wedding on leave in London. And I still have a photograph of the day that we met. And my wife's brother was in army uniform. And I decided to dress in civvies with just a suit. And I'm looking around, and my mother comes along and she said, "Look, let me introduce you to the beautiful girl." So I said, "No, Mum, leave me alone. I can find my own girls." Anyway, after a while, I was speaking to Ivan, which is Norma's brother. I said, "Who's the lovely girl over there?" He said, "That's my wife. That's my brother." That's my brother. So he introduced me, and that was it. We've now been married 68 years after that. Because of that, yeah. So, yeah. We've been very, very fortunate. We've worked together, always been together. Had 2 kids. Unfortunately, my daughter died of leukemia when she was 36, I think it was, which is very, very sad time for us. And we've always overcome. We've always managed without help. Words fail me at the moment, but they were very difficult times. And somehow managed to survive. And we've known poverty, but I know Norma had 5 jobs at once, all at the same time, just to make things, to make ends meet. And somehow or other, I was what it was called a tallyman, a man who used to go door to door selling. And it's a long story, but Norma's boss was looking for a salesman, and he was in the garment industry. He was looking for a salesman, and I decided to join. But before that, what happened basically before that, I wanted to get out of door-to-door selling. So we saw an advertisement in the newspapers, the Evening Standard, that for £50, which was a lot of money in those days, for £50 you could have a correspondence course and we would find you a job. And so the first job was, it was a job called Movie Tex. The first one was Vodafone I didn't want. I went to a company called Movie Tex, and they did interchangeable letters and numbers, including notice boards you've seen with interchangeable letters and numbers. And I joined the company. My mother said to me, "You're crazy, for the first time you got a decent job. What were you doing that?" Anyway, so I did. And I became the top salesman. Their top salesman. And in the meantime, Norma's boss was looking for a salesman because he was opening up a factory and he was looking for a salesman to sell his clothes. And I decided to leave this. And that's when my mother said to me, "Why are you leaving this? You're earning money for the first time." And I don't know why. It's like a gift from heaven. So I don't, it was intuition. And I joined. And I left. And again, I became his top salesman. For the first time, I earned big money. Big money. And at some point, decided to start on my own with a partner. Made it into a big business, employed 1,100 employees in the end, went public. And here I am today. So somewhere or other, from bad, whatever it is, we've got to this situation, which is good, and made the life for ourselves. But again, thanks to the priest, thanks to my mother, thanks to all that, none of that would have happened without them.
What was the name of your company?
Jacques Vert, V-E-R-T. My partner's name was Alan
Decide
Green.
to give it that name?
A lot of ladies here would know about it, yeah. Yeah.
How did you decide to give it that name?
Well, I'm Jacques. Alan Green. And so it became Jacques Vert. And we did what I would call the better quality stuff. We always went for the better stuff. And that's why we really did very well supplying most of the major department stores as well as our own stores. As I said, employed 1,100 people in the end. It went public.
So one thing a little further back that we also didn't name was when you told us about your children, you didn't say their names. So if you wanted to introduce your kids for the interview.
Well, there's Paul. Paul is now 60, just 60. And there was Debbie who came first. Debbie was a lovely girl. She suffered really badly from leukemia and was in hospital for 2 years. And it got to the stage where there was no hope for her. And Norma and I had to decide what to do. And we actually pulled the plug, which was a very, very sad time. And then we have 3 grandchildren, which is really lovely. Starting with David, who now is really up in ITs. He does extremely well. And the 2 girls who are at university, which is Charlotte and Alyssa.
And I think it's a bit of a turn.
One more thing.
And I'd like to ask you.
One more thing. I've just had a great grandchild.
Oh,
Yeah, just 4 months old now, Julius. Lovely boy.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I think it's a bit of a turn in our conversation, but I'd like to ask you about when you started to tell your story and what you've done to talk about Holocaust history.
In what way? I don't quite understand you. Sorry.
Okay. I'm interested in when you started telling your story or reading your speech publicly and being involved in Holocaust history.
I came to realize that there's less and less of us around, and people wanted to know my story, and it's difficult to recount at first. It's something that's very difficult to remember, but you have to remember. And so I started off, I think, at the golf club initially, or the synagogue. The synagogue asked me to do it, or we did it at the synagogue. And then I think I did the golf club. And I think once you've done it once or twice, it becomes easier to tell. You're not so frightened to tell the stories because it's not something you've lived up to, or you've been brought up to make speeches and such likes, and in front of audience. It can be quite scary at times, but it's something now I need to do, and it's something that I want to do more and more, because I realize now that there's so few of us left. For example, I went to a meeting of the Jewish Refugees Association, where they invited people to come and meet Jewish people around who might have had association with the Holocaust. And it was a small luncheon, which was quite interesting. And everybody was talking about their grandparents and their great-grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody was talking about, and I was the only one that was an actual survivor. All the others were talking about the second generation and third generation. And that's when it really made me realize that maybe I should be talking about it more. So I've got two more talks. There's one at the golf club, which I'm doing on the Holocaust Day, and the synagogues invited me to do one. I did one in Florida, which was quite strange actually, because the synagogue was absolutely full. And when I gave my talk and I'd finished, everybody stood up and clapped. I mean, it was like you would have thought that was the strangest thing that happened. Very strange event. Yeah.
And what is it that you want people to know when you tell your story?
That you shouldn't forget. That's the most important thing. It did happen. It happened to me. And it happened to millions of other Jewish people. Don't forget, whatever happens. Don't throw it under the carpet. It happened. It really did happen. That's the most important thing.
For sure. Does it give you a message that you think of for the future?
We're living in a very strange world at the moment. There's so much going on at the moment. So many wars. You think about at this moment, people are worried about Taiwan and China and Ukraine and so many other things. And this is and Israel's always in trouble regarding when is the next war going to erupt between them and the Arabs. And so it's the way of the world at the moment. Everybody wants to somehow or other kill each other. And nothing has changed. It's been going on for centuries.
if I think this would be a spot for a break and to talk about how to do a conclusion or what we've missed out on if we want to go back at all.
Mm-hmm.
Ollie? Okay, after that break, we're back at our interview with Jack Cynamon. Jack, you were talking about that you also did a talk at your grandson's school.
Yeah, it was very interesting, actually. It was one of my first talks because I hadn't really got completely into it as I am today, but they wanted to know a little bit about my history. So I was invited to go to the school and talk about the Holocaust. But you have to be very careful what you say to 11-year-olds and the 12-year-old. You have to keep it very mild. So I had the occasion of speaking to them, and I must say they were very attentive and throwing rather strange questions at you because they don't fully appreciate the situation. But it was interesting, the fact that I was able to tell them about the Holocaust and how I was hidden by a priest, etc., etc. But I kept it down to not to be frightening, if you like, or too emotional about it either. Yeah. So,
what do you think that you really wanted, especially kids of that age, to know? What did you really want to tell them?
Well, I don't know if the penny drops, if you know what I mean. You know, you can talk to kids of 11-year-olds. Because I've experienced being an 11-year-old and not fully understanding the world or what is really going on. You can only tell them about it. I think, in my opinion, when they reach probably somewhere in 15, 16, they maybe could comprehend it a little bit more. But it's a start. It's a start. You know.
And there's definitely, you see the importance of telling younger generations.
Well, now I've made it a point, you know, that I've sort of been offered my services, if you like, as such, to anybody who wants to listen to my story. Something I wouldn't have done probably 5, 6 years ago even. You know, it's something that now I realize that, as I said, having gone to this meeting just a few weeks ago and being the only survivor, and everybody's talking about second and third generation, and I realized there can't be many of us left.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I and the Shoah Foundation, we both find your story very, very important, and thank you so much for telling it. And we're going to turn toward recording some of the important documents that you have in your possession still, including some things that speak directly to what your father went through. So just before we turn to those documents, I wanted to say on behalf of the Shoah Foundation and myself, thank you so much for sitting for this interview. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. And goodbye.
And that can be our cut and turn. Okay, we're back at our interview with Jack Cynamon, and Jack is now going to show us some documents and photos that he's managed to find. Jack, could you tell us what this is?
Basically, it's Mechelen. Mechelen is a holding camp for Jews. You might appreciate the fact that, or you may not know the fact that when Jews were rounded up, they didn't just send them to camp straight away. They had to hold them until there were sufficient prisoners, if you like, to make up a convoy of maybe 600 to 1,000 people. And this is a photograph of the actual holding camp in Mechelen, which is in just outside Brussels, as it was with all the Jewish people being held. You can see their luggage and such likes there. And what it's like today, I don't know how the people can manage to live knowing what the history before was, but you can see that it is just a normal block of flats and apartments, etc., as it is today.
And is this the camp your father was in?
Yes, this is the actual camp there where my father was held, with Convoy 23. And we'll be able to show you an actual document showing that he was sent on Convoy 23 to Auschwitz.
Okay. that should do. And Jack, what is this document here?
This is the document that came from the German, where they keep all their records. And as you can see here, it's number 23, which is Convoy 23. And my father's name is very clearly printed. That's his date of birth, the 3rd of the 3rd, 01. That's it. That's from the German archives.
And it shows that your father was sent on that transport to Auschwitz.
Exactly.
And cut. And Jack, what are these documents?
Well, basically, the first one here is Association of Jews in Belgium, which have to be registered with the town hall. So you can see, for example, the first name is my father, Ikos, and that he's Polish. The second name is my mother, Zederboom, which is a name, maiden name, and that's the fact that she's English, and it says Angleterre, as you can see here. And the third one is me, Jacques, born in Brussels, etc., and the son. The second document is a register for Jews. This is the pre-wearing the Gala Latter, the Jewish Star David. And again, you can see my father's name, my mother's name, that's my father, that's my mother, Zederboom, and this is me. So this is the before wearing the Jewish Star David. And I do remember wearing that star. I do remember wearing that star.
Wow. And cut. And Jack, what do we have here?
This is a document where my father, still living in Poland, applied for his passport. And as you can see, he is Polish. But it doesn't say that he's Polish because his nationality is Jewish. It says nationality Jewish.
Oh.
Incredible.
And yeah.
And that's it.
Is that the last one?
There's only one. No, that's. Can I go on, or do you want me to go on?
Yeah. We can move to the next one.
Okay.
And Jack, what do we have in these two documents?
Well, this is the original, only memory I had of being hidden. And as I said, it's, I mentioned before, it belonged to a catalogue that I had of the Belgian royal family. And apparently, whilst in hiding, I'd won my first star. And it says in French, souvenir of Jacques Knud, my false name, of winning my first star. And it's dated the 20th of February 1944. And the second one is when I wanted to find out about myself, and I'd written away to Enfant Caché. And this is the message I received from them. And if you can see here, it actually says, Cynamon Jacques, hidden name, Jacques Knud, my date of birth, your hidden child code, 1411, and you were placed with Charles Prince Baudouin, Chateau d'Osterie, etc., etc., etc. And you can see that is when I first found out about myself, who I was and where I was hidden.
And in what year do you think you got that document?
That document actually is dated the 9th of December 2005.
Wow. And cut. Jack, what's this document?
Well, basically, you can see it's a list, an alphabetical list of hidden children. And the name of the person who hid me, Abbé Joseph André, which is listed here, and his address, 40 Place de l'Ange, which is still around, and that's in Namur. And I was hidden in Homme Prince Baudouin in Seville.
Oh. When did you get this document?
Well, this is dated, let me see. I'm not sure about that. I can't see the date on it. But obviously, when I was making, inquiries about myself, it is 20th of September 2005.
Okay. And cut. Jack, who's in this picture?
That is a picture of Gustave Colette, the assistant to the bishop who saved my life, and I phoned, and I decided to go and meet him in Belgium. You may recall when I phoned him up, he replied, Jackie, which is me. So we had a long chat, and he is basically another person I owe my life to.
Wow. And cut. And Jack, could you describe this picture to us?
Well, you can see in the center there, Father Andre, surrounded by all the Jewish children that he saved. At one stage, I thought that maybe my photograph was in there. I could have been in there as well, but obviously I wasn't. But it's something to savor. And I must mention that when he died, his coffin was held by all the survivors. Yeah. His coffin was draped with the Star of David, and the survivors held the coffin to his grave.
And this is the photo you saw at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And cut. And Jack, this is a picture of?
Yep. Bishop Joseph Andre. A wonderful man.
Said
he had a tree planted in Yad Vashem as one amongst the righteous.
He won the Righteous Among the Nations award.
Righteous Amongst the Nations, yes. He saved, I don't know, maybe 1,000, 1,500 Jewish children. Quite amazing man.
Indeed. And cut. And Jack, what are these documents?
Well, basically, these came from the Washington Museum and the likes. Basically, you can see my mother, Rosie Cynamon. She was also transported. She was born in 1907. She was also transported to Mechelen, and obviously she left there because she went to Vittel because she was a citizen of a country at war and she was saved. And then you got the name of my father, Iko Cynamon. He was transported on convoy 24, and that's the serial number of the convoy, and it goes on. And then these are all the Cynamons family. You can see from there to there that have all died in the Holocaust, and also went to Mechelen and such likes. We lost, and whatever. It's in the album. It's in there. No, I can show that. Yeah, that was a nice photograph.
And Jack, can you tell us about this picture?
Well, Mum and Dad, obviously pre-war, I would think, or maybe soon after the war, but I would think that's pre-war, something like that. I can't be sure of the date, but it's one of the few photographs that I have. Yeah.
Wonderful. And cut. And Jack, how about this picture?
Well, I think this is probably just before I went into hiding. I'm probably 7 there. And it's a lovely, lovely photograph of my mother and father and myself, 7 years old.
And cut. And Jack, what is this photo?
Well, this is the proof that my mother kept her word. My mother kept her word about me being bar mitzvahed. A word to my father.
And where were you bar mitzvahed?
Oh, in London, Stoke Newington. Well, age 13, obviously. But
it was Poets Road
yeah.
Synagogue.
Did you know that? Yeah, Poets Road Synagogue. Yep. It's now. Yeah, and that is the proof that she kept her word, and she struggled to make ends meet for me to have my bar mitzvah.
And cut.